Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Cold War, a feminist policy for the Asia Pacific. Uh, we'll get started in a few moments. Um, just give me one moment. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I am so excited to hold this discussion today because, right now we're watching essentially, I think, a very important moment in current times. At least 8,000 people have been murdered in Gaza as the U.S. is militarizing on multiple fronts around the world. The Biden administration is still pressing Congress for his $106 billion military budget for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and the border with Mexico. When he first kind of announced this, Biden talked about American power and American alliances in his Oval Office address. And the truth, of course, is as we see in Palestine, it's not really the case at all that American alliances and American power protect. In fact, it hurts people around the world. American alliance have, for example, split Korea into for more than 70 years. Underdeveloped countries like the Philippines and Papua New Guinea facilitated atrocities throughout the region of the Asia Pacific and the world. The American military has colonized islands all over the Pacific, including Guam or Guahan and the North Marianas Islands, where indigenous people's human rights are violated and their land desecrated to advance the new Cold War against China. Now, in that address that Biden made, a big part of it was militarizing the Asia Pacific region, where he wants $7.4 billion to go to what he calls the Indo-Pacific Alliance, also including places like Taiwan. That doesn't even include the $10 billion that have been allocated for weaponizing Taiwan, authorized by the US Senate last year. And about $3.4 billion of that request is to build a naval base with attack submarines targeting China. And that's all on top of $9.1 billion for what Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced, the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. And on top of everything, we've also had AUKUS and the attack submarines that have been shared with Australia and Britain in the Asia Pacific. And we've seen the remilitarization of old colonial empires such as Japan and the militarization in the region that's been kind of happening under the new alliance between Japan and Korea and the United States. This means, of course, more harm caused to places like Guam, the Marshall Islands, and Okinawa, where legacies of colonialism, patriarchy, and pollution will continue. Meanwhile, in the US, marginalized communities are being torn apart. Members of, our own community are afraid to walk outside. Hate crimes against the Asian American and Pacific Islander community have risen due to this Cold War. And of course, other communities in context of the US supporting atrocities in Gaza and expanding the war on terror in Africa, locking up asylum seekers and the border. And this is all at the cost of so many other solutions that we could employ to really build a peaceful future for all. Um, so I'm really, really, really excited that we have a panel that is analyzing international politics, not from the point of view of the privileged and the powerful, but analyzing politics from the point of view of people, from a pro-peace, feminist, decolonized, pro-environmental perspective. And I'm pleased to be joined by Anlin Wang, who is the Democratic Socialist of America's International Committee steering committee co-chair. I'm also pleased to be joined by Nick Flores, a Chamorro activist from Guam, who is on the front lines of fighting the U.S. military and its abuses in the Asia Pacific region, specifically in Guam. And later joined by Shin Kim, regional coordinator with Korea Peace Now. So thanks everyone for joining this panel. Um, Nick, Aline, can you all hear me? Hi. I'd love to start first by welcoming our third panelist, Shin Kim, who's joining now. Um, and just say I'm very, very honored to talk with all of you about, what's the way out of this current situation where we have new conflicts, this new Cold War on top of old conflicts as well. Um, and I guess I just like to open the floor by talking to you, Nick. I mean, you've been, essentially doing a lot with regards to the aftermath of a hurricane and the effects of climate change, which is also linked to U.S. militarism in Guam. And you've also been talking about the ways in which, the U.S. military is just, poisoning and making dangerous the local environment of Guam as well, and the effect that that has on residents there, people there. So, from your point of view, like, what's happening in Guam, and uh, you know, how is the United States acting? How's the United States military acting in Guam?
Wow. Hafide, first of all, it's an honor to be here with all of you. Thanks so much, Kale, Code Pink, and all the organizers for putting this together. And to the other panelists, it's really an honor to be here with you both today. That's a very big question, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly where to start because there is so much happening here in Guahan, but also in the Northern Marianas Islands, as well as Palau, and just throughout the Micronesian region. Really, there's a very rapid militarization and military expansion happening in the region. Just real quickly, like in Palau, there are several projects right now that are desecrating land, definitely acting without free, prior, and informed consent of the indigenous people of Palau. And it's the same here in Guahan, and it's the same in the Northern Marianas. In the Northern Marianas, for instance, there's a divert airfield that's being constructed. Land is being cleared, and what a divert airfield is for in Tinian is when Guam is devastated by attacks in conflict, when we are devastated in war, this will be the backup sort of runway for military planes to use. And so all of these are of course connected to things that are happening in Hawaii, in the Philippines, in Okinawa, in Korea, and of course all the way to Palestine, with the increased militarization that's happening here, looking at all of the, for instance, all the war industry, all the weapons manufacturers making a lot of money here for doing things like establishing the missile defense system. They are also profiting from all of the atrocities taking place in Palestine right now. And for us, we have to remember, or it's not easy. I mean, it's not hard for us to make these connections. For us, this is not a distant conflict. It's very much connected to the ongoing occupation of our islands. It's linked to the taking of land, the violent displacement that's also occurred here and throughout the Pacific, the violent displacement of indigenous peoples in Turtle Island. So there's a lot happening. It's hard to really start. I organize with a few grassroots organizations, but primarily with Protehilisek and Save Retidian. And we're engaged in a few different strategies. We have a few lawsuits to stop, the Air Force and the Navy, from some of this destructive behavior, violations of federal law, including the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act, for both the firing range complex as well as their permit application to do open burning and open detonation. Both of these activities, pose tremendous risk to our sole source aquifer that provides our island 80 to 90% of our drinking water. We're also looking at this compounding of all these issues, because as you mentioned earlier, we had a super typhoon here just in May, and it was a super typhoon Mawar, and we still haven't fully recovered from that superstorm. And so to sit here in our island, to watch this massive clearing and grading for the construction of a new marine base, and also to anticipate more desecration and destruction, for instance, for the building of the missile defense system, to watch all of this contamination, all of these horrible things happening, really, the guaranteed destruction of endangered species, the desecration of ancestral burials, and then to also stand, at ground zero for the climate crisis, to have this superstorm happen, and to know that the military is the world's worst polluter and contributor of the climate crisis. And so, like, it's all compounded right here. And after the typhoon, we saw how the clearing in the north, for instance, for the base, made our aquifer very vulnerable. We went immediately into a water crisis. We also saw how it made the coastline extremely vulnerable. The jungles up in the north were really damaged because of the massive clearing. There wasn't enough of the forest structure to help protect itself. And then, of course, with the missile defense system, we have to really talk about how it's making us a bigger target in conflict. A further militarization, of course, does not keep us safe. It has never kept us safe. Militarization in Palestine isn't keeping Palestinians and Israelis safe. Militarization in the United States isn't keeping American citizens safe. And it's not in Hawaii, it's not in Okinawa, it's not in the Philippines, and everywhere else that the US has bases in the world. And so it's hard to pinpoint where to start. So lately, we've been really engaged in protesting the activation of the live fire training range complex. Right now, it's being tested. We've had several protests there just in the last few weeks. We've also been hosting several protests from Guahan and throughout the archipelago and in Saipan, really, for connecting, bringing the issues of Palestine home. I mean, we have Chamorro Palestinian families who are very affected, and we need to, right now, we're really centering them, and also leading the movement here, leading the work here for protests, letter writing campaigns, talking to our leaders about having a resolution. We actually shot down a very problematic resolution in the Guam legislature, which was racist and condemned Hamas and did not in solidarity with Israel. And so we prevented that from moving forward as an official statement of the territory of the island of Guam. It's just really hard to understate. You can't overstate really the impacts and just the volume of everything happening here in Guam. And I mean, even as something as small as vandalism, there was an incident of vandalism over this past weekend, and we were able to catch some security footage of somebody writing on a wall, and it's obvious that they may be, well, to many of us, it's obvious that they may be stationed here with the military, possibly in the Air Force. And they had a military issued backpack, for instance. They signed the graffiti with AIC, which is Air Force. Somebody told me what it meant. It's an Air Force acronym. It means Airman First Class, A1C. But the message was really interesting. It said, "Stop racism against white Americans. Our tax dollars pay for your entire government, your paychecks. Without us, you're nothing." And this is just one small incident. He wrote on 2 buildings, "Stop racism against white Americans." And this is just one tiny incident. Like, for some of us, we can laugh about it, this is obviously someone's feeling very fragile and threatened, but also this is really just a sign of things to come with the relocation of Marines from Okinawa to Guahan. We already have had a history of violence, of conflict between civilian and military communities here, of racism, and it's actually included for instance, in the environmental impact statement for Guahan with the relocation of Marines from Okinawa to Guam, that we will have increased racial tensions here and increased fighting even among community members when the Marines come here. And so this is really just not only a glimpse into what's to come, but a reminder of the things that we've already experienced. this person had a shaved head and wore boots, and he looked quite scary. He reminded me of like a skinhead, a member of the KKK, and anyway, yeah, I guess we have to, it reminded me too of like, graffiti in when settlers go into the homes in Israel. I mean, there's just I'm sorry, in Palestine, in occupied Palestine. I'm all over the place. I've had quite an emotional morning, so I apologize. But we've just been engaged in so many things. We've been engaged around issues around the missile defense system. We've been engaged around issues around the firing range. We just did a huge campaign for our fishing community, because in addition to the land they're already occupying and desecrating, they're taking 3 miles of ocean, taking away some of our richest fishing ground. And so we had a huge protest, a boat ride out of the surface danger zone. When the firing range is in activation, the surface danger zone will be activated. And so the richest fishing area is right outside of Latex zone. And in fact, 1 year, Guam was in the Guinness Book of World Records for this marlin that was caught by a Chamorro fisherman, Gregorio Perez, who our boat basin, our marina is named after. And it's in those waters that he caught that fish. And so that area of fishing, our people have been fishing there for thousands of years, from land and in the open ocean. And they want to take it away for 273 days out of the year while the firing range is in operation. And so we've also been really working to activate our local fishing community to bring about, all of these connections for environmental sovereignty, food sovereignty, cultural sovereignty, spiritual sovereignty, political sovereignty, economic sovereignty, to make all these connections for our folks, and of course to connect them to the bigger, monster that the military industrial complex truly is. Yeah, and so that's everything kind of in a nutshell, Cole.
That's very. I really appreciate. No worries. No worries at all. That's a very, I think prescient analysis also like rooted in what's happening in your community. And I also really resonate with what you said about the importance that Guam has become a target, and how people are of course on the front lines of like this new Cold War, and like obviously are affected more than anyone. And it kind of makes you remember, we've seen this before too. I mean, this new Cold War isn't out of nowhere. Of course, there was the last Cold War, and one of the first conflicts there in that period was, the U.S. War in Korea, which is of course ongoing. And I'm so glad Shin, you could make it to share your what you see as an activist, focused on bringing peace to Korea after more than 7 decades. From your vantage point, how does this new Cold War amplify what the U.S. military has been doing and how it's behaved on the Korean Peninsula, and vice versa, what that means for American politics, the U.S. political landscape here?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. It's also really just a treat to be here with everyone and Code Pink, and my fellow comrades. Yeah, so exactly as kind of you mentioned, right? Like the Korean War, it is still ongoing. And what is kind of hidden about this fact, and what has kind of really, I think, poorly given it the name of like the forgotten war in the US psyche, right, is that it kind of underlies the fact that all this militarization, all this violence, and obviously we see kind of the most like brutal, kind of prescient examples of it in, say, Palestine. But then there's kind of what comes after that when it has happened, and what happens to that land when capitalist colonial brutalization takes place on it. And for just a bit of history, I guess, right, when you have the Korean War, you have what was essentially a series of US-led, very anti-communist massacres of civilian populations, and the collapsing of one of the first reunified Korean governments after Japanese colonization, and freedom from that colonization. that has led into kind of the splits that we see today in between the Koreas, and how and the Korean War especially is linked with like the Cold War around the globe, right? And one Cold War that we kind of see happening again with our threats with the US, kind of threats with China, and the kind of allocation of all non-white colonized people to this sphere of meant to be kind of subdued, right? And as Nick mentioned, we see it, in Guam, we see it in Okinawa, and we see it in kind of everywhere where they have become these laboratories for the US to really exert its colonial power, its continued colonial brutality. And even, South Korea, for instance, right, which serves as, a nation kind of qua US military factory. It is one of the largest, biggest base presences, I believe, outside the country. I think it's third next to Germany and Japan, but don't quote me on that. You have, for example, South Korean chaebols such as Hyundai actually actively funding the genocide in Palestine, creating the machinery for that genocide. And for example, it's places, and these are all linked, and I believe, as Nick really said eloquently, like into this one global system of oppression, that our struggles fundamentally are the same. And it is against not just the US conceptually, not just the US, but against kind of the capitalism, the imperialism, and all that which it stands for against humanity itself. And the Cold War is kind of but a really active an attempt by the US to kind of, assert its continued power on the main stage, one that we kind of see cracks of, and we see it's declining. And we see constant resistance to it from within the core, and to a really violent, inhumane effort to subjugate all of those who do not agree with its tactics. And you see this militarized and kind of like these narratives that link all these places that have been victimized and brutalized by the US together. So, for example, if you look at the Jerusalem Post, I believe there is one prominent article by a US statesman on how, like Palestine is linked to North Korea. Look how evil they are together, right? It is that kind of standard repetition of the evil axis, constantly being reborn again and again and again. At one point, to largely to right Arab, brown, and yellow bodies, as we see, with China, or even back kind of during the pandemic when that first version of the rhetoric sprouted. And now, we've gone to things like, for example, intifada being criminalized, right? This constant logic of dehumanization. And the Korean War was just really but an example of that, and also kind of one of the core of where the US's tactics in this end was organized. And the biggest legacy we see of the Korean War is, one, the lack of a really militant left resistance in Korea. I don't mean lack of as in there is not one right now. There absolutely is. But the fact of the matter is that so much of that movement was brutalized and destroyed in the war, and is continuing to be criminalized today by Yoon, as we see with the Korean security law, which outlaws any quote unquote sympathy to North Korea, which can be construed as any form of leftism. I believe even recently, just as last year, there was a prominent professor arrested because he had been to North Korea, because he had works on North Korea. And of course, when I say North Korea, I only use it as a geographical denoter. They're both one Korea, and I think and I think that we have to assert that continuously as Koreans who know that fundamentally this is a land that was separated by a capitalist coup, that we had a reunified government, that there is this nation that we fight for in the same grounds as our Indigenous brothers everywhere, our Indigenous brothers and sisters everywhere, who are seeking to go beyond just the nation state as we know it. Which is all to say, kind of, that, for example, with Palestine, right, you have these labs of where military weapons are tested. In the Korean War, you had, the first versions of mass bombings, of airstrikes. 70% of North Korea was destroyed in, back then, what was really an innovation in brutality, and just in like the pure technical machinery, kind of that warfare. That was where it started. And also this psycho warfare, right, where if one, there's a couple things you can do about war, as the US has taught us. It's to either shunt it out of the American imaginary entirely, to make people forget about it, to make people forget about that the US has consequences outside of it, and all the while demonizing and continue to um, to brutalize the people that it is attempting to wipe out. Might have lost track of the question, but I do think that is all to say, like, history to some extent is constantly repeating itself, right? In the Korean War, if
Sorry.
you're so good, if what is different was, the tech, the year, the circumstances in which it took place, all that is really different now is that same target. And we can't also forget that, at the time of the Korean War, it was fundamentally not just Korea, but also a global struggle, right? We had the Vietnam War soon after. It was within the periphery of the entire Cold War. And now we have, struggles in Iran, in Palestine. For example, credit to like the Jinjian Azadi, the woman life freedom movement, legacies of colonialism, all taking place over and over and over again. And the Korean War, I think, is a really kind of, I don't want to say succinct, but perhaps what happens when that you have that microcosm kind of collapse into this huge conflict that continues to haunt us today.
Absolutely. I feel like when you mentioned also about like, the consequence of US aggression being so like being a big reason why like it's hard to have peace on the Korean Peninsula in Korea. And it reminds me a lot of how, this policy is kind of, I feel, is exported, in the context of the United States to to the Yoon administration in Seoul, because we have the similar dynamic in the United States of the new Cold War essentially used to crack down on dissent. With it's like we have just recently the FBI, or rather there's a committee in Congress that was set up against like the CCP, the CPC, the Chinese, the Communist Party of China, and was saying that the FBI should investigate TikTok, and you also have the targeting of Chinese and non-Chinese peace activists. You have even government officials who say something that's in favor of détente, in the mainstream media, which are often backed by a lot of these capitalists as well. They get criticized as being soft on whatever perceived threat the United States is targeting. And there's also real world effects of this with the targeting and hate crimes against the AAPI community and marginalized communities across the United States. It goes all the way up from like diplomats to people working, to pedestrians. And Anlene, I guess I'd like you to speak to what how is this war in many ways against ourselves in I guess what is I don't want to say the continental United States. This is a land of multiple indigenous nations that were all ravaged by the initial American conquest. But for within like the contiguous 48 states plus Alaska and Hawaii, where supposedly we have a set of laws and safety nets and human rights. That's what they say, at least. What really is happening when it comes to this new Cold War and how it affects people?
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Kale. And th thanks for the question. And I think what I'd say here, I think builds off of what a lot of what Nate and Shim spoke to just now as well. I think what you were speaking to just there was a little bit about the way that the U.S. war machine turns itself inward on its own, on our own domestic population, on us here as U.S. citizens within the U.S. But it also ends up serving as a way of indirectly oppressing our communities more generally as well. I think maybe the most obvious thing I would point to is just how the society is funded, how the government is funded. Um, I've heard folks say this a number of times when I work in municipal government, and this is a phrase I hear at least around a tax season, at least budget season. You show me a budget, you show me your moral priorities. And here in the United States, this is a country with military budget we can't even calculate. Like, the numbers that the government puts out end up underestimating the total figure and obscuring other kinds of spending. But at the very least, what's publicly available is well north of $1 trillion, $1,000 billion. For some comparison, I think the total food program for women, infants, and children, WIC for short, that's what a lot of people know that name as, WIC, that program gets around what was cut this year from 6 billion to 5 billion. On what grounds? Well, there needed to be more money to combat Russia and China. So, in other words, the United States federal government is taking food out of the mouths of babies, out of the mouths of starving people, to give to some of the wealthiest industries in this country in order to do what? Well, to carry out military occupation of places like Guahan, places in Korea, as Shin and Nick were talking about. It's taking money from our poor to give to our rich to suppress people outside here who have no say in our policy. So that is, to my mind, directly a war on the population of the U.S. I'm calling right now from the city of Philadelphia. A lot of people know it as the poorest big city in the United States. In the US, as incomes have gradually been rising, in large swaths of Philadelphia, incomes have fallen. In this city, as white poverty rates continue to decrease, Black and brown poverty rates stay the same. Apparently, there's no money to pay for these programs, and when advocates ask for the local government to fund anti-poverty programs, they're routinely told year after year, sorry, there's no money. And this comes from the top down, where not just federal Republicans, but Democrats too, say we have to take down social spending because we have to instead spend this money to counter China and Russia. So I think there's a lot more examples I could give. I'll say another one, which I like to tell people in Philly who might ask, well, why we should care about this stuff. In Philly, everyone knows our libraries and our rec centers are run down. Oftentimes, not even open after 4 or 5 p.m. What's the point of trying to keep kids off the street with rec centers that aren't open when they're after school? Those get around 50, maybe $70 million a year. Total U.S. library spending is around 15 billion a year. And you contrast that with well over $1 trillion. Does that make any kind of sense for a society that wants its people to do well? No. And so that, to my mind, is a direct war on the people of the United States in order for us, our ruling class, to wage war against the people of China and Russia, and also and people like Guahan as well.
Mm. I really appreciate that insight, especially since there's the adage, money for war can't feed the poor, and it's real. And I feel like this new Cold War, this political culture of antagonism, is directly linked to the situation of economic insecurity that so many people find themselves in around the world. Just half the U.S. military annual budget over a 10-year period could get rid of world hunger as well. And I kind of now want to open it up to, I guess, everyone to chime in, and because we're in this period where the United States and China have this rivalry. It's affecting so many communities. It's affecting communities in the US and China and so many communities around the Asia Pacific. I mean, even during like what was kind of reported as like a brief moment of détente in San Francisco when the two presidents met each other, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was traveling the region, to Indonesia, to South Korea, etc., making all kinds of military deals, and alliances and surveillance. Um, we just had a U.S. spy plane over the Taiwan Strait a few days ago. Um, uh, I think people who want peace all know there's a problem. We don't have peace now, and we're every day, one potential mistake away from all-out war, which would be devastating. But what does a pro-peace, like, socially just foreign policy vision for the Asia Pacific look like? What's like the world? We often say in the streets when we march, another world is possible. What does that world look like? And I want to open it up to all of you.
Yeah, I'm happy to start us off. I think one thing that we, as like folks working for peace, must fundamentally recognize is that peace in itself is a relation. To the US, I do think that the US would believe peace is the entire erasure of Palestinians. Dropping bombs is peace because it leads to peace. And that is the phrasing that they always use this as. And we see it everywhere where the US kind of continues endless war, right? It's all for the sake of some peace in the future. And so our work is to actually like take that to say like, oh, you call a duck what it is, a duck, and to assert a peace that one at the very minimum, right, is the halting of this sort of very inflamed war, and all that entails, from like economic sanctions to people being unable to visit their ancestral homelands, to curtailing movement, families seeing each other, communicating with each other. So that is kind of like the basest level, right? So for example, at Korea Peace Now, one of the big work that we do is to work with legislative offices to officially get a resolution through the Senate to end the Korean War officially, right? And it's not done just because it's a symbolic gesture. It's done because that curtails massively U.S. military funding to Korea. It creates the path for separated Koreans to see each other, and from Koreans who've never seen the other side to see each other. And so that is the minimum. And then what we, I think, assert as one, like this feminist version of peace, this kind of critical very version of peace, is one that I think dovetails with what socialists are saying, with what indigenous movements are saying, with what all these movements that have been opposing this constant cycle of war as a means of exploitation does. And kind of, I think one of the ways is knowing that, one, as I think Anlin pointed this out very well, right? Like that there's that funding aspect of it that, we all know. I think if you just look it up, I don't know it off the top of my head, but we all know how huge the US military budget is. And that's like the classic argument, right? Like, what if this budget were redistributed so that people could live? And also so that the state could function as theoretically it is meant to function. And I think what our piece aims to do is to challenge that and be like, it won't happen because the peace that the US depends on is actually that much funding in the military. The US depends on this huge investment, this offshore investment in funding genocide, in funding destruction, because it profits off of all of it. It's built on it. And to be like, what does a nation, what does a people look like completely divorced from that? And I think we see all around the world efforts to do that, and how deeply those efforts are shut down, which only emphasizes the point of international solidarity even more. And I'll open it up to my other panelists.
Yeah, I guess Nate, what Shanna, that really resonated with like what I'm understanding is like the contradiction between like how peace is framed, because like, peace is often like just a way to like end the war on, the oppressor's terms. Um, and Nick, you're coming from a place that has been under, occupation for, multiple empires, Spain, Japan, the United States. So I guess, for Guahan, what does, a feminist decolonized future look like?
Okay, thank you. Well, just to also reflect on what Shin was describing, it really resonated with me. It's very much what we hear here, this kind of idea, like to save the village, we have to burn it, to save Guam, to save this island, we need to desecrate your ancestors. We need to condemn and occupy 30% of your island and condemn more land. We need to clear all your forests. We need to put your aquifer, make your aquifer very vulnerable, and contaminate your soil and contaminate your air to keep you safe. It's just none of it makes sense. And even thinking about what Anlin was talking about with WIC being cut, millions of people dealing with hunger in the United States, and then now just thinking of how that money was taken to fund these weapons going to Israel, and to ensure, basically that starvation is impacting the Palestinian people. It's as a feminist, for a feminist framework for us here, it means a lot of things, but I also want to just tap into, the International Women's Network Against Militarizations, their framework for genuine security, which is of course very different from these concepts of national security or military security, right? Or not just concepts, but realities, like our lived colonial experiences every day. Genuine security, which is really what we strive for, what we want, and that, of course, is that our physical natural environment is protected, that it's able to sustain human life and natural life, that our basic needs are met: clothing, food, shelter, healthcare, education, that our human dignity is honored, our culture is respected, and also that our environment, our natural and cultural resources, the world we live in is protected from avoidable harm. And of course, we're seeing, so many violations of that, violations of our Indigenous rights, our civil rights now, and human rights, with the enduring occupation, the enduring colonization of the Marianas Archipelago, as well as Hawaii, as well as and of course occupations, military occupations where they exist, like in the Philippines and in Korea. But anyway, for us, I mean, it would be something like just this idea of like our sole source aquifer, giving our island 80 to 90% of its drinking water. How that is so vulnerable right now with this heavy expansion, this massive expansion that's taking place. That is such a critical basic right that is, it's at stake. And then also, thinking about land back. Like I said, 30% of our island is occupied by the military. I come from a family that lost land that was taken by eminent domain after World War II. And there are several families, many Chamorro families, who had that experience, and some who have to depend on public programs because they have literally lost their land, and it's also impacted our connection to the land, the way we grow food, our relationships to each other, our genealogies. And so for me, I would be land back, ensuring the protection of our aquifer, but also this real solid framework that prioritizes genuine security over everything else. I think I'll leave it there, and I can pass it on to Anlin. But for us, it's so many it's all of those things and so much more, because even just to mention, like, I just feel the need to mention that again, but here in the Pacific, we really see these weapons manufacturers, this war industry, just also profiting, and we have to, it's just really concentrating the resources, the wealth, in a small group of people, at the exploitation, and destruction for people around the world. I mean, RIMPAC is coming up next year. The Rim of the Pacific exercises. We have exercises here all the time. Every time there's one of these exercises, there are tremendous environmental, there's all kinds of environmental harms. In Korea, there are constant U.S. military drills and exercises, and when these happen, there's also an increase of gendered violence, gendered and sexual violence to women, children, and Two-Spirit and trans, relatives and community members, and as well, when I just think about RIMPAC, every time RIMPAC happens, anytime there's an exercise here in Guam, you see all these ads for these bars, come here. It's for the military to come, have fun, play in our paradise, in our tropical paradise. It's horrible. And then after RIMPAC, there's always this big expo for military industries to say, hey, look at all our fancy toys, come and buy them, And what's happening next year in Hawaii when RIMPAC happens is also the Festival of Pacific Arts. This is when Pacific nations from Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia, all of these colonial constructs, right? Indigenous folks come together to honor each other's art and history and culture, but also to stand in solidarity for each other's sovereignty. And so these things are back to back happening in Hawaii next year. And then even to think, I just feel like we're all connected. I'm just saying this all because it's all connected to what's happening here in Guahan, what's happening all over the Asia Pacific region, and also what's happening in Palestine. And then just one more thing, I just feel the need to mention the fuel from Red Hill. The fuel from Red Hill, that's been contaminating the aquifer there. That's being, millions of gallons are being drained every day. It's going to be transferred to the Philippines. It's going to be stored in the Philippines and in Australia. And so this is another example of where this risk, this harm that, is being transported. These burdens, this is just being moved around. Nothing is secure. Nothing is secure with the increased militarization of the world. As these companies get richer and more powerful, our environment, our cultures, our indigenous peoples, people of color being imprisoned, being wrongfully imprisoned, being locked up for life. It's all connected. We have to make all of these intersections more clear for our folks. We have to call out all the intersections because, truly the more people see it where we live, where we're dealing with colonization in real time, with hypermilitarization of our island in real time, we also have to insert these conversations. It's very difficult. And poverty is a serious issue here. So there's also these issues of high military enlistment. Military recruitment is a real issue. We have ROTC programs in school and in all the high schools and in the college. I mean, gosh, some kids from Guam even won national titles for the drill team competitions. It's so heavily ingrained and pervasive, and we really need to root it out. We need to root out, the propaganda, the conditioning that this is the only way to be, that war is inevitable, that capitalism is our only option, that being a colony of the United States is the only option, supporting a country that just is really a hypocrisy of democracy and freedom. It's really hard to bring these conversations even at the grassroots level here, but that we're doing it all at the same time. We have to go grassroots, we have to go big, we have to do international solidarity, national solidarity, we have to do legal strategy, we have to do local policy advocacy. And it's constant, it's relentless, just like the militarization and the buildup is relentless, just like the destruction and desecration, contamination are relentless, just like all of these horrible atrocities in the world have just been incessant. And so we have to, so for me, the vision is, I wish we could really just bottle it up. I mean, we know that this was all new. The empires are younger than some of the oldest forests in the world. And we can undo it. We can undo empire. And we have to really come together to figure out ways, we can undo empire together within our lifetime, because our struggles are so connected and intertwined, and we're just stronger together. I hope that answers the question, Kale.
That was a great answer. I guess, it just makes me I appreciate you bringing up how it's like an ongoing kind of daily affirmation to do this kind of work to root out this propaganda and this conditioning. And before I give it to you, Eileen, I guess I want to um uh kind of touch on this question that was just asked in the chat as well about what you were speaking to as well, Nick, about how we do support and rebuild communities and what that looks like. And you know what's like the advice also, as well as answering the question, what's the advice you would give to people who want to see um to let people live their own lives, who want to see that world where clean water is recognized, where other social rights are affirmed? What advice would you give? Oh, Eileen, can you hear me?
Gotcha. I guess, so sorry, could you repeat just the tail end of that question?
Oh yeah, what advice would you give to people who want to make this world possible?
Gotcha. Misheard that. I thought that was directed at everyone. So for me, I think the top thing that folks got to do is get informed and get organized. Now, but being on this call, I suspect that y'all already are taking a degree I mean, you're clearly taking self-initiative to get informed. If you're wondering about what to do, though, my top advice is to get organized. Well, with what? Well, if you're in a place like Guahan, I definitely recommend checking out groups like the ones that Nate has mentioned, Protege Texan. Get involved with grassroots communities that are directly organizing to stop U.S. militarism. If you're not living in one of those communities, you should support those communities. So to that extent, Nate, I hope you can share some resources about Protege Texan here. But what if you're in the United States? What if you're within the borders of the mainland of the United States? Is there anything you can do? To my mind, yes. I think you can support the organizations that are also directly organizing against U.S. militarism right now. I'm a little biased myself. I belong to one. It's the Democratic Socialists of America. And there, within the Democratic Socialists of America, we're a national organization, the biggest socialist organization in the United States. And we have an international committee which focuses on opposing U.S. militarism, and we work with chapters around the country in supporting them in their local efforts as well. And of course, you should definitely join Code Pink. Code Pink has a variety of campaigns related to U.S. militarism. I won't speak on all of them, but I'll let Kale do that. But every single one of Code Pink's efforts speaks to an important subject matter of U.S. militarism. And the reason why it's important for us to get involved with these collectives is because alone, can we make the change against the $1 trillion military? I don't think so. With all due respect to all your individual capabilities, I strongly suspect that we're going to be much more effective in an organization working together. So please get organized, join an organization today. Oh, and I'll put
Thanks,
the link to join
Eileen.
DSA in the chat as
Yeah. I feel like this has been like a very rich like conversation, and I mean there's just really so much to talk about because like the legacies of colonialism. I like how you phrase it, Nick. They're much younger than the forests and like the environment and the peoples that have been building civilization for so long. And I feel like um you know I often think of the quote, I think it's from Gramsci, of having the pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will when it comes to uh change and activism and being hopeful. And I think the fact that these legacies, even though they're harmful and still causing harm, they haven't been here forever. Just because it has been doesn't mean will always be so. So I guess I just want to end and hear from all of you on um, you know, uh, what's your hope for the next couple of years, if you see any, and yeah, just briefly, Shin, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we're in a moment of quite a good amount of clarity, I think, amid kind of the really tragic destruction. What we see is, I think, around the world, and if you've been paying attention on social media, you can see how the entire world is kind of rising up for Palestine and for the vision of, I think, security that it's asserting, right? The right to, simply live and to be on the land without the existential threat. Um, I think you have a lot of people getting radicalized and kind of forming and connecting, their own analyses of the world to what Palestinians have been asserting for years and years and years now of of a sovereignty that is beyond sovereignty, um, in the state sense, and in the human sense, more like. Um, and recently, I'm currently on a university campus in grad school, and APEC was in San Francisco recently, which is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. And there you have some of the most powerful leaders in the world and some of the most kind of reprehensible war criminals of our time. So Biden was in town, Yoon was in town, Kishida from Japan was in town, and I can name a lot more. And what we saw when we kind of protested against them was this vast coalition of orgs coming together. We had Filipino migrant workers, we had Bayan, DSA was there, Nodotole, different left Korean organization was there, Indigenous groups were all there, the forgot the name, but like the local SF tribe was there as well. And so we have this kind of intense culmination of grassroots movements coming together to assert that whatever, even if we don't have that future like drawn out is completely clearly as we'd like it to, we never will. But we know that right now is not correct. And so I think my hope is to see this movement, not just for Palestine, but against kind of war, against colonialism, and against this way of being all around the world, is to come together into another movement, which I think there's sparks of, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Anlene, what's your hope for the future going forward?
For sure. I think Nick and Shin covered a lot of this sort of immediate stuff I want to say. I think I would go maybe just a little bit further in that I think it's I think the U.S. does have to do more than just uh, leave behind its current military footprint. I think it's also got to play an active role in the restorative justice process in correcting for the past 100, sometimes more years of U.S. colonization, U.S. militarism. To the extent that there's reversible environmental damage, well, we have an obligation to put in the resources to reverse that. If there's irreversible environmental damage, for example, then or more severe environmental damage, then we have to go beyond and provide reparations, some other measure of restorative justice. I know this is maybe applying, I think maybe some folks see as like liberal U.S. Criminal justice reform, measures of foreign affairs, but I think it is only with the restorative justice framework do we actually can we actually get to a future where the U.S. doesn't just like clap its hands, walk away, and just leave the mess for everyone else to clean up, but actually takes part in cleaning up its own mess.
Mm, I like that because especially in the context of what does peace look like when we think about uh the US potentially negotiating security assurances, or what it should do is negotiate security assurances with China and the DPRK, North Korea, what that looks like, ways to solve like the disputes in the South China Sea could also fit under that. I think that's an interesting point. And Nick, I want to finish with your prospects for the future and what gives you hope to build the new world.
Well, thanks for that question. When you first asked it, I did get a little sad. Some days you do feel hopeless, but it's really in the young folks, I have to say, here at home, the youth. All my hope is in the youth. we have a patron saint of Guam called Our Lady of Camelin, and December 8th is her feast day. And it's also the day that Guam was attacked in World War II. And so it represents, the beginning of the Japanese occupation in Guam. And of course, the very American recapture. And so we remember this every single year. We remember when we were attacked and occupied. We remember when we were, quote unquote, liberated, or a lot of us say reoccupied by the United States, which is in the summertime. But this patron saint procession, this patron saint feast day, we usually have a procession. We haven't had a procession since the start of COVID. And I wanted to go to the procession with signs talking about Palestine and the military expansion here in Guam. I wanted to bring a sign that said, Inafamaulik, which is an indigenous word, means peace, no war, no buildup, and peace for Palestine. And I was asked by many elders not to go. They thought it was going to be really harmful to a cultural space and hurtful to some of our elders. And I was really upset about it. And I conceded. And then a younger person who was going to go with me just couldn't help himself and decided on his own to go. And he brought a sign that said, the Pope called for a ceasefire. Our government should too. And he was met with a lot of love and a lot of support. There's maybe one angry person there, but the youth, he said, when the young students came up in front, when young people came up, they were cheering, which is, you don't have that. This is a very prayerful sort of procession. You follow this statue and you say the rosary. And the next day I was so upset. I was like, why? Screw being respectful at this point. We should be out in the streets. We should be upsetting people. We should be disrespecting the status quo. We should be challenging the status quo. And I was so upset that we did not go through that action. And then I saw that my friend Noah had gone, and I was just so overwhelmed. And it reminded me it might not be my crew. I'm anti-status now. It might not be the elders who we love and follow and want to protect and honor. It's the young folks who are going to be who are really going to see our hopes and dreams for a free Guahan and a freer world come true. And so and then I just wanted to, what Anlene was saying about repair. I was thinking about decontamination and how it's essentially impossible in so many places. Here we have 19 Superfund sites. But I also think of like Vieques in Puerto Rico and Koholave in Hawaii, and how the bombing in Koholave broke that water table. This is they were testing these American bombs in these occupied indigenous lands in Puerto Rico and Hawaii. And these are the things that are being used against Palestinian people right now by Israel. These are weapons being used in occupied Palestine. These are sites that Koholave and Vieques may never see repair and decontamination, and so it is hard to imagine, but we still have to ask for it, demand it, decontamination, disarmament, and depart. Please go. My hope is really that one day we will see the bases leave and we will have a truly independent Guam and Marianas Archipelago. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you, Anlene and Chen. This has been such a I feel a very spiriting and empowering talk, because everything y'all said just is so crucial, and everything y'all said also gives me hope as well, from what's happening with young people, and how you have so many people out calling for a ceasefire, calling for a free Palestine from the river to the sea. And it's a great the challenges are real, as you were saying, Shin, and it's the road ahead is not going to be smooth, but the first way to get better is admitting there's a problem, and then continued action every day that actually works so that we are all liberated, no matter where we are, whether that's Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, San Francisco, Bay Area, Guahan, anywhere, everywhere on Earth. And I think that, all of this, as you were saying also, Nick, before, all of our struggles are linked. And you can't talk about a feminist foreign policy without talking about decolonization, without talking about environmental protection, without talking about indigenous communities, and just empowering people, like actual democracy. So I just want to say thanks to you all, and thanks to you all for coming on, attending this panel, everyone who attended and RSVP'd. I dropped a note in the chat for our petition to reject Kurt Campbell as Deputy Secretary of State and from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And he Campbell kind of represents a very pro-war footing, and it's time that we stand up to the administration and say we cannot have more escalation. So I just like to say thank you everybody for joining this this hour of